All right, there we go. Can everyone see that all right? Perfect. All right, so first things first, my name is kylan.hurt, and I'm the organizer for the San Diego Blockchain Development Meetup. So thank you for coming today. We are still a relatively new meetup. We only started in, I think, January of this year. Obviously, we created it with the idea that we wanted developers to meet each other. We wanted recruiters to meet developers to meet companies that are hiring. So we definitely took on this meetup as a way of nourishing the local blockchain development community. So that is the main goal here. So that's one reason, aside from Wi-Fi not working, that's one reason why we give you guys plenty of time to talk with one another, to network. Our hopes is that some of the encounters that you have here, some of the connections that you make here might eventually turn into opportunities in the near future. So that's what we're trying to do with this meetup. I would like to give a thank you to Paul and the rest of the Edge team for, round of applause, for letting us use this space for this meetup, because without that, it would be really difficult to run this actual meetup. Okay, so let's see here. Where should I start? Okay, so who here knows what actually, we'll wait one moment. We'll get to the first slide. Just to give you a little outline of what we're going to do here, we're going to go through the slides. That'll probably take about half hour. Then after that, I'm going to go through some demonstrations so that some of the code that you see and some of the concepts actually become more tangible. In my opinion, if you have abstract concepts, that's great, but it's not until you really apply them that they become real. So hopefully those demonstrations will give you an idea of what this sort of technology could actually look like. Okay, so the first slide is the bio. I'm going to be really quick because this presentation is not about me. I'm born and raised in San Diego. I majored in civil engineering at the University of Southern California. I graduated in 2010, and I was doing construction management, right, because that's civil engineering. And I guess some would say that construction management is like as boring as watching concrete dry. Wait, no, that's wrong. That was actually my task, watching concrete dry. So as you can guess, something like that can be a little bit on the boring side. So I realized a lot of the tasks that I liked and the sorts of things that people like to come to me for were computer related. So I decided to start making a transition into learning how to code. That means I start off with HTML and CSS, then PHP and MySQL, which are more server-side, better for web applications and dynamic websites. I was able to get my foot in the door by starting off in digital marketing. I worked at a place called Z Global in La Jolla. I started working there, I think, 2013 or so, and it was a good way for me to get my foot in the door. And then once I was in, I started to network and really start to learn more. In general, I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to be doing, and as a young coder, it made sense to kind of follow the opportunity, and that's more or less what has led me to JavaScript. In March of 2017, so last year, I joined a company that some of you guys may have heard of, Airbits. I don't know, it's... Yes, so now obviously we've rebranded to Edge, but we were Airbits when I first started here. And so I guess that means I've been working here for about, let's see here, a little bit over a year. Also, just as a side note, I was doing some podcasting for a while. We started podcasting in August 2017. We got a little bit too busy, so in June of 2018, I kind of stopped podcasting. But for those of you who watch our Edge Live Q&A, which is live on Fridays at noon, our team actually takes questions and comments from users in our audience, and we respond to them live and on the air. So we still use some of my studio and equipment for that, so I still get to scratch that podcasting itch, so to speak. And then, of course, as I mentioned, in early 2018, I think it was January this year, we created the San Diego Blockchain Development Meetup. Okay, so if you're in this meetup, then most likely you know quite a bit about cryptocurrency. So I guess the first thing to start off with is, okay, what exactly is an exchange? Traditionally, before cryptocurrency, when people were talking about exchanges, is usually in the context of something like a stock exchange, New York Stock Exchange, or maybe Forex, right? Foreign exchange. So those are more traditional exchanges that are used. Obviously, that's for people buying and selling stocks or trading one type of fiat currency for another, like US dollars to euros, euros to British pounds, something like that. So once cryptocurrency came along, then people needed a way to onboard into cryptocurrency. Now, obviously, one way to do that is to do it through mining, but most people don't have the technical know-how to be able to mine. So the most common way that people onboard into cryptocurrency, of course, is by taking their fiat money and buying cryptocurrency with it. Historically, there have been some, I'm trying to think here, there's some major fiat to crypto exchanges that you guys have would probably recognize. One of them obviously is Coinbase. That's probably the biggest one in the United States. MTGOX is another one, same with Bitfinex. And so you might notice something here, and this is going to be a recurring theme. Two of those three fiat to crypto exchanges have become adjectives. So if you've been goxed or if you've been Bitfinexed, that means that you have been scammed or screwed over or you've been hacked. So remember that, because that's going to become a recurring theme in this presentation. Now, currently, these fiat to crypto exchanges see something like tens of billions, that's with a B, of dollars worth of volume per day. So the second type of cryptocurrency exchange is of course just a crypto to crypto exchange. So if you're going from something like Bitcoin to Ethereum, Ethereum to Monero, Monero to maybe an ERC20 token. Some of the more common exchanges that you would recognize would be something like Binance, Bittrex, BitMEX, and Shapeshift is another one. There's been some recent news regarding Shapeshift. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to that. And that'll be another point that we'll talk about in a moment here. Also, crypto to crypto exchanges see something like tens of billions of US dollars in volume per day. In general, these fiat to crypto and crypto to crypto volumes, in my opinion, they're most likely to continue going up, at least in the short and medium term. So fiat to crypto is one paradigm. The other sort of axis, I guess you could say, is centralized exchanges versus decentralized exchanges. So what does it mean for an exchange to be centralized? Typically, that means that there is one central authority. It's typically a for-profit company that has the servers on which the exchange is hosted and trades are executed under their control. So something like that, obviously, part of the name of the game, I guess you could say, in cryptocurrency is decentralization. And the centralization of these exchanges causes specific issues. So among those issues, of course, are the fact that centralization creates a single point of failure. So for one thing, that means that the government is the local governments in whatever jurisdiction, for example, that exchange is being hosted, the governments can pressure the exchanges to do what they want, to comply with their regulations and their rules. Some of the more common compliance issues are know your customer regulations and anti-money laundering laws. Essentially, that means that the government wants to make sure that users are not using, that the money is not coming from illicit activities and that it's not being used for illicit activities. And of course, when we say illicit activities, that can kind of mean anything. It typically means, I guess the general rule is that it means that there's activity that the government disagrees with. That could be something like, it could be like narcotics related, it could be other sorts of mafia related, it could be human trafficking, or it could be just something, it could be really anything that the government doesn't like. It's relatively arbitrary, I guess would be a good way to put it. So if people are, how would I say this? So another issue, and this becomes especially relevant in the United States, is that cryptocurrency to cryptocurrency and crypto to fiat trades have been deemed as taxable events in the United States. So that means that if you're doing trading, you need to keep track of your gains and pay capital gains on those. And normally this wouldn't be an issue. Maybe Bitcoin was all about privacy, we thought. So people thought that they could just trade and it wouldn't be an issue. But as time has gone on, these exchanges have essentially caved in to government pressure, especially the United States government, and they are passing along people's histories, their trading history. And obviously that becomes an issue because these exchanges also, at the behest of the government, tend to require your identity to really do any significant exchanging. And also the last major issue is that these exchanges typically have the real custody of your funds. So you don't really have access to the private keys. And in order to do any trading, you typically have to ask permission. So if you were to do something with Coinbase, you wanted to buy or sell, a lot of times there will be limits on on how much trading you can do. Okay, so sorry, go ahead. Yeah, no, so this is just kind of a mix of, I guess you could say, centralized exchanges. I know Coinbase, I typically think of fiat to crypto, but I know they also do crypto to crypto exchanges as well. Yeah. All right, so hypothetically, if you want to create some sort of decentralized exchange, it would make sense that the sorts of changes to the sorts of changes to currency that can occur when you decentralize should be somewhat analogous to the sorts of changes you could expect with trading if you were making it decentralized, right? So how would I say this? So, okay, theoretically, you should be able to leverage the decentralization in order to, for starters, make it censorship resistant. So like I said, that's the way that most blockchains work. So if you're doing something with Bitcoin, I guess I can't say Ethereum, but some of the other cryptocurrencies, if you're sending a transaction, people don't want it to be able to be reversed. Also, by being censorship resistant, we mean that we want the network to be decentralized in a way such that shutting down of one or several nodes of that network is not critical to the actual health of the rest of the network. So if bad actors, whoever they may be, wanted to shut down some of the nodes, that means that the network should still function even without those nodes. Another characteristic that you could add is by making it trustless. So not just should decentralized exchanges not really ask you for your identity, but they shouldn't really even care. It should be something where once you ask the code to do what you want it to do, it should do it, and it should treat all people equally according to its code. Now, there are already some decentralized exchanges out there. You might be familiar with some of them. EtherDelta is one, BitShares is another one, Waves is another one. Currently, the ecospace sees something like tens of millions, that's with an M, of daily volume of US dollars. So that's 3 orders of magnitude off from what we're seeing from centralized exchanges, which hypothetically could give you an idea of how big decentralized exchange could get in the future. So in the current decentralized exchange ecospace, there are plenty of weaknesses, right? Because if there weren't weaknesses, then everyone would be using decentralized exchange. Among those are, for starters, most of the blockchains out there don't really have a mature smart contract language that's been developed. I hate to say it, but some of these examples might be Bitcoin and Monero. For some of these blockchains, in order to make things more trustless with smart contracts, some of them are lacking, and unfortunately, sometimes smart contracts were a bit of I'm trying to think what the term is. There was an oversight. They didn't consider it until it was almost too late to go back and fix it. Let's see here. Another big issue is that decentralized exchanges, since they tend to be primarily written on Ethereum, there's only so many different trading pairs you can do. Ethereum is good because it has ERC20 tokens. It has a standard for arbitrarily creating assets. But if you want to do something like Ethereum to Monero, Monero to Bitcoin, stuff like that, you typically are not able to do that. And unfortunately, some of the decentralized exchanges that are out there, if they try to do atomic swaps, sometimes they're using some sort of intermediary, which is kind of not the same, right? Because then you're introducing whatever their intermediary is into the trade. Now, another big issue is that most of these decentralized exchanges follow what I call a siloed approach, or what many people call a siloed approach. And that means that the users of any of these decentralized exchanges are really only able to trade and find counterparties from other users that are within these decentralized exchanges. So a user on EtherDelta typically is not able to trade with a user on Waves. Someone on Waves is typically not able to, to trade with someone on BitShares, something like that. So that's a major issue because And the reason why that's an issue, or why that has become an issue, is because there's no standardized way for these decentralized exchanges, for these decentralized apps to communicate with one another. And when you have a team of one app and a team of another, if you're going to try to make them agree on how to communicate with one another, you're going to find that they're going to be butting heads a lot. Also, because of the siloed approach, there's not much liquidity. So even if you want to be someone trading, unfortunately, if you can't find a trading partner, then you're just not going to be able to trade. And of course, if users are not able to trade, then they're just not going to use the app. They're not going to use the exchange. We'll just go back to something like a centralized exchange for the time being. Another thing is that some of the Ethereum-based decentralized exchanges that are out there, if you want to make modifications to your order, so let's say the prices are changing and you want to change the amount of your order, and sometimes in order to make those changes, you actually have to adjust the smart contract, which means you incur gas. And as many of you know, during the last year especially, gas prices and mining fees for cryptocurrency in general have hit points where they were just straight up terrible. Cost prohibitive, I guess you could say. Okay, so that's enough about the current DEX ecospace. And I'm going to refer to it as DEX now, Decentralized Exchange. That's what DEX is. Decentralized Exchange is a mouthful. So last year in 2017, two coders who were very familiar with smart contracts and Ethereum decided to create 0x. At the top right, you have Will Warren. Underneath him is Amir Bandiali. I think I'm saying that right. They realized that the decentralized exchange ecospace was critically lacking certain features. So they decided to work together. And the main change that they decided to implement was to create a standard for communicating intent to trade. And since they were building 0x initially on the Ethereum blockchain, they decided that these Ethereum full nodes would be the method by which you would be communicating with one another. But this communication would happen off-chain. So with gas fees being really high, you don't want to put too much data on the blockchain because it just costs too much money. Let's see here. Also, by moving that communication off the blockchain layer and onto its own protocol layer, that means that, and by standardizing it, they have given decentralized applications, DEXs, the ability to communicate with one another. And by giving them the ability to communicate with one another, you've also given them the ability to start sharing their order pools and aggregating the order books. And of course, that's great because that increases liquidity and it increases the chances that anyone making a trade will actually be able to find a counterparty. So as a little bit of a side note, they also have their own token. It's a ZRX token. That's the currency code for it. They had the token sale back in August of 2017. It sounds like everyone considers it a big success. They got $24 million in something like 24 hours. And that ZRX token is going to be important here because it's actually, let's see here. There's two main roles that it plays. The first is governance. So the 0x project is trying to be decentralized in the sense that they want governance to be up to the people who are using the protocol. So ZRX token holders will be able to influence the roadmap for the project. Also, and perhaps this is the kind of thorn in the side, is ZRX is also current in its in 0x's current form. ZRX tokens are required to be used as the fees. So if you are paying fees to a relayer, which I'll talk about in a moment, it has to be denominated in ZRX. Okay, so a little bit more detail about the specifics of 0x. As I mentioned before, it uses Ethereum smart contracts. I think that was an obvious choice because Ethereum has the most mature smart contract and development community. Now, since they are starting off with a sort of minimum viable product, it makes sense that they would start off with the ability to trade between Ethereum-based assets. That means you can trade Ethereum and ERC20 tokens. I think they are adding other standardized tokens. I think it's ERC 721, although I don't know the current status of that. Now,
That'll be
which, right. So, and you see at the bottom, V2, I think it went in beta just earlier this week, if I remember correctly. Right. Okay, so let's see here. So those are the sorts of trading pairs that they're starting off with. But obviously, if you really want the ecospace to grow, then you'll have to add cross-chain atomic swaps. They've made it pretty clear that they are looking to add those as quickly as they humanly can. Now, most of their software is written, obviously the smart contracts are in something like Solidity, but the rest of their software is written in JavaScript. Does anyone here work with JavaScript at all or familiar with JavaScript? Right. So JavaScript, it makes sense for them to write it in JavaScript because people who are writing applications, especially web applications, typically most of the code is written in JavaScript. So that was, I would think, an obvious choice. Let's see here. Gas fees. Okay, so when users are doing trades, they do have to pay the gas fees. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, also any fees that go to these relayers are paid in ZRX. So we'll talk about relayers in a moment, but essentially relayers are full nodes. Let's see here. Yeah. Okay, so relayers are kind of at the core of how the 0x network works. The 0x relayer is essentially a full Ethereum node that's responsible for relaying, hence the term relayer, a user or trader's intention to trade across decentralized exchanges or decentralized apps. So the relayers, in order for them to be able to share their order books with other relayers, that means that they will open themselves to being pinged by other relayers, and they will ping those other relayers as well. Now, as they communicate with one another and put together the aggregate order book, they will have to watch out for things like invalid orders, duplicates, stuff like that. So they have to constantly be filtering out any bad orders, because the last thing you want is a user thinking that their trade's going to go through only to find out that the trade that was going to fill their order was actually invalid. Let's see here. So there's almost a countless or like an infinite number of ways that a relayer can generate revenue. I've listed some of the more basic ways here. The first and the most obvious, of course, is by letting users submit orders through them. And in that way, they are able to set a fee for the users. If the users don't like the fee, they can use a different relayer. But if they do accept the fee, then once that order goes through, the relayer actually gets that fee amount. Also, if you want something a little bit more advanced, relayers, if they're holding some money in reserves, they can constantly be scanning for orders that overlap one another, and they could actually fill both of those orders, and if there's a spread, they could take that spread to generate some profit. I have seen some more forward-looking proposals about additional ways that they could generate revenue. For example, as I mentioned, if you're aggregating the order books, that can be pretty intensive for the relayers. So hypothetically, you could have maybe a relayer whose sole purpose is to actually just do the aggregation for the other relayers. And hypothetically, if the 0x software would allow it, they could create a field where those relayers could also get compensated. So as I mentioned, the software is still in its early stages. There are a lot of possibilities. Go ahead.
Token usage, do they plan in something like a stake and create real utility?
Yeah, I guess it depends how you look at it. Hypothetically, the 0x, okay, so he's wondering, okay, what's keeping the token price up, essentially, right? Well, honestly, I think that even if you weren't taking fees in ZRX, I think there's probably enough, I guess you could say, utility through the fact that it's governance. So if you have 0x software being built, let's say I'm a big relayer, I'm a big decentralized exchange, and I'm making tons of money, I'm going to want to have a say in where the software goes next. And you're talking about these decentralized exchanges are going to be humongous companies. They're already starting, they're growing quickly. They're eventually going to be the next generation of Coinbases, Bitfinexes, and they're going to want to have as much say as possible over this protocol, I think, as they humanly possibly can get.
But they're not solving scalability issues.
Who's not? Right. You're concerned about the scalability of Ethereum. Yeah, I would say it is an issue. They are working on scalability issues. The question is, will the scalability solutions come faster than the demand for the decentralized exchange on Ethereum? I'll be honest. I'm not a, how would I say this? I'm not a homer in the sense. It doesn't matter to me what blockchain it gets done on. I could hypothetically see a situation where if gas prices get too difficult, that 0x starts working on implementing their protocol on other, how would I say it, on other blockchains. I think they've openly said that they're open to doing that. They just want to create a standardized form of communication, a protocol that can be used not just on Ethereum but on other blockchains. So obviously something like EOS would be one of the first ones that you might think about. And if you were able to get it to work on EOS, I think, there's not as many assets on there right now, right? You'd be able to trade something like EOS. I don't know how many tokens they have. But yeah, if you could get the, if you could get the gas prices low enough, that'd be good. And if you could get, because Ethereum has the 20 to 30 second block times, that's also a bit of an issue. So if you could find a way to get that down. Yeah, I mean, right now, like I said, the current DEX ecospace is not super mature. This is early on. There will be growing pains.
At the moment, relays have
Right. Let's see here. So that's in the next slide. I'll mention that. Let me just finish this one up real quick then. Okay, so order matching and then aggregate. Okay, guess we're done with that. Okay, so at the core of this software, there's probably the main sort of type of data is what they call an order. So you can see an example here, and James, I'll answer your question in a moment. So some of this might look like gibberish. If you guys are familiar with Ethereum, it probably looks perfectly fine. So yeah, so the maker, okay, you have to get used to some of the terminology when it comes to trades, because there's stuff like a maker and a taker. Essentially, the maker is the person who first asserts, hey, I would like to trade, let's say it's rep tokens for ZRX tokens or something like that. So in this maker field, you have their public address, right? Because if you don't have their public address, how are they going to receive any funds? And usually that maker will submit an order to a relayer, and they don't yet know who the person is that's going to fill the order. Because if they did know, then they would probably just trade directly with that person. Fee recipient, so that's the relayer's public address. Obviously, the relayer needs that in order to be able to receive fees. Maker token address, taker token address, those are just the exchange. These are the token addresses for the tokens that are being used, right? So the one from which the ICO tokens were distributed. Exchange contract address, that is the Solidity template that 0x provides. By making it a standardized template, they're able to really audit it quite a bit more and test it quite a bit more. Salt, that's a pseudo-random string of numbers. So essentially, every time you create an order, it should create a different salt. That way, every order technically is different. Maker token amount, taker token amount. So that's just how much rep and how much ZRX you're looking to trade. You see all those zeros there. That's because each token has a specific number of decimal places. So don't let it freak you out if you see big numbers like that. Expiration and Unix timestamp. So that's just letting you set a time during which it can actually expire, right? Because you don't want to put an order out there that you forget about and months later gets filled because some price dropped and all of a sudden you're out, $100,000 or something like that. So usually you'll set that for like an hour or a day or whatever it may be. Okay, so maker fee and taker fee. So this is a bit more interesting. So these are obviously denominated in ZRX, which has 18 decimal places. So whatever this number is comes out to 0.1. Taker fee comes out to 0.15. So this is just an example. That comes out to about a quarter of ZRX, which is something like $2. Now, that's just an example. So each order needs to be submitted through a relayer. Now, they do not have to be submitted through the same relayer because the relayers talk with one another. So when the trade goes through, this maker fee goes to whoever was the relayer for the maker, and the taker fee goes to whoever was the maker, was the relayer for the taker. Does that make sense? I realize the terminology can get pretty confusing. Yes. So you would think yes, but there are examples like Paradex is Coinbase uses 0x on Paradex, at least that's my understanding. They don't talk to other relayers because they have enough liquidity that they say, what's the point? We'll just use the standard and we won't give anyone else a cut. What's up? Yeah, it's yeah, it definitely is. But when you're as big as Coinbase, I guess you already got enough. So obviously you need a place for the signature. And then eventually when the taker puts in their data, then they will also add in their signature. That way the actual transactions can go through and the order can actually be filled. This order hash is just a hash of all the data in the order. And since that should always be unique, that means it can be used as an ID, as a primary key. So it should always be unique. Okay, so if you're creating a relayer, there are some characteristics that you'll want if you want to be a good relayer, at least from what I can tell. First, of course, is that you need it to be performant. You need a computer that's fast. You're going to have to aggregate and ping and aggregate orders from other relayers and let other relayers ping yours. You're also going to have to filter out bad orders, ones that have expired, like I mentioned before, ones where someone doesn't have sufficient funds, or maybe the transaction to fill the order is already in the mempool. And when you consider that the block times are 20 to 30 seconds, they're going to have to go through this cycle probably a couple times a minute. So also, since market conditions are going to change at times, that means that you'll want algorithms. You'll want some sort of way to be able to look at the data that you've had in the past and decide what's the best method to try to generate revenue during any given point of time. So for one of the example here is you need to find, okay, let me think here, actually. So let's say one example, I won't get too much into it, is that let's say the price of ZRX starts to go up quite a bit, like astronomical, then users are not going to want to keep on paying the same amount of ZRX. You'll need to adjust the amount of ZRX or they won't want to use you. Another example is if you want to split orders. That's a whole bag of worms that is a very big issue for 0x. I'll talk about that in a moment. And let's see here. So yeah, you'll want the relayer to be versatile so it can figure out what kind of strategy it wants to use, and hopefully it has as many strategies as possible. So as many tools in its tool belt to try to get orders filled and generate revenue. Now, perhaps the most critical of all these characteristics is actually you need access to users. So if you don't have some sort of way to get users, then no one's going to use you. They won't even know how to submit orders to you. So that's why most of the relayers have some sort of front end. Typically, at least today, it looks like mostly web applications. And if that web application is hard to use, then no one's going to submit orders through it. If it's easy to use, then you can get a lot of people using it and you can generate a lot of money. Okay, so 0x. As much as I love the software, there are some things that I consider weaknesses. I think even they will recognize that there are areas of improvement. As mentioned before, slow Ethereum block times, 20 to 30 seconds. So that creates a big issue for application developers, because if you want someone to know that their order's being submitted, do you show them a little spinny thing for 30 seconds or a minute? Or do you just put the trade in the background, say, hey, we'll let you know when it's been filled? So that starts to put some decision-making onto the app developers. Now, obviously, if the competition is centralized exchanges, you can have your trades go through essentially instantaneously. So there's some catching up to do there. Limited liquidity is a big issue. So for example, if I look on the order books let's see here. If I look on the order books and I try to actually aggregate as many orders as possible on 0x right now, the total number of orders is usually somewhere less than 1,000, at least of the relayers that are willing to share their order books. When you consider that there's almost a limitless amount of ERC20 tokens, that means that most trading pairs don't have too many outstanding orders that you can fill. So that is a major issue. So yeah, especially because there's so many coins out there. You know, this is cryptocurrency, and I guess if you're a shit coin, then it makes it less likely that you'll be able to find like a partner. You know what I mean? I guess that's like a metaphor for life. So splitting orders is a big issue because we're talking about smart contracts here. The more orders that you take, the more orders that your order gets split into means the more gas fees that are going to be incurred. So that's a major issue because otherwise the chances of you finding someone who's looking to trade the exact amount that you want to trade is highly unlikely, especially with currencies that have, 18 decimals of divisibility. The other thing we mentioned, obviously, limited trading pairs. Obviously, as atomic swaps come, then that will alleviate some of those issues. But if we're being honest, those are going to take a while to come. We're talking 6 months to a year before we really start seeing them being implemented. And then, of course, the one thing I always harp on, ZRX tokens necessary for fees. That's just one extra, how would I say it? It's one extra step that a user has to go through. I think maybe it would be nice if we could pay fees in whatever denominations are being traded, right? Okay, so that's enough about, that's enough slides. So I think it's demo time. So I have a few demos here. You guys will have to be a little bit patient, and don't be surprised if something goes wrong. I really tried to add as much stuff in as possible because I do want you guys to be able to see some examples of what this could look like.